What's up, everybody? I'm Stan, and welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. This is iRate Reviews, the show where I go over a comic book, its story, its art, give you my impressions, and let you know whether it's something to go to the shop for or not. I'm going to be talking about Amazing Spider-Man number 22, which continues on the Clone Conspiracy. If you've been following along with my reviews of the Clone Conspiracy and its tie-ins, I'm sure that you've seen the fact that I don't necessarily give a lot of weight to these individual tie-ins because they haven't really progressed the story much. And that is very different for Amazing Spider-Man number 22, because what we see is not only things happening in real time, this is a direct parallel with the actual story itself. It's not telling a history, but it is, and this is really Peter Parker and another version of Peter Parker and Ben Reilly convincing themselves that this is the best course of action and why this person came to be. So let's talk about the story of Ben Reilly. Ben Reilly is a clone, and this is explained throughout the beginning of the actual Amazing Spider-Man issue. For those people that don't necessarily know the history of Ben Reilly, you get to see his deterioration, you get to see his creation, you get to see how he went through his whole mental different struggles and things like that, how he really believed that he was Peter Parker at that point in time, became the Scarlet Spider, became this other Spider-Man when Peter wasn't necessarily around, when he thought he was the real Spider-Man. And then ultimately we got into the Clone Saga where he dissolved in Peter's hands, in his arms, like he died. But he didn't really die, because Miles Warren evidently was around, at the end of the Clone Saga, went and gathered up the remains of, Ben Reilly and put them into his new cloning chamber. So at that point in time, he basically grew Ben Reilly back from his particles into this chamber where he's designed it to kind of protect against the upper limits of Spider-Man's ability, so that way Ben Reilly couldn't escape. And Ben Reilly basically became a cloned human guinea pig for Miles Warren. And this is where things get a little bit gross. They get a little bit disgusting in terms of Miles Warren's psyche and his thought process for this thing. Because Ben still believes that he's human. He's got all of his memories up until his final death. However, Miles Warren is trying to perfect his cloning technology, make it a little bit more viable, make it a little bit easier, reduce the cellular degradation, make him a much more robust individual. So Miles Warren goes about killing Ben Reilly 27 times. Beyond just fading into dust in Spider-Man's arms, he is first electrocuted, he is drowned, he is frozen, he is melted in acid, he's covered in boils. It is a grotesque evaluation of Miles Warren's cloning procedure. And it gets to the point where Ben Reilly, who was Peter Parker, who has been killed over and over and over again, remembering the individuals that kind of shaped him, what used to be Peter Parker and Ben Reilly's form of strength, remembering the people that count on him, he was starting to forget those kind of things and just remembering the deaths that he has died over and over and over in this test tube of a laboratory. And that is what finally cracked him. At that point in time, he adrenaline spike, he exceeded the limitations of Spider-Man ever before, broke from his bonds, crashed out of there, and ultimately took it out on Miles Warren. Because he wasn't real. He's not Peter Parker. He doesn't have to subscribe to the limits of Spider-Man. He is a very different individual, and this gets much more apparent as we kind of go on. So what he does is he throws Miles Warren into his own little cloning compartment, makes multiple different things, and explains to him as just like, hey, I've solved your cloning problem. Essentially, I have come up with a solution to something that you couldn't. And as long as you take this little pill, you're going to be perfectly fine. However, if you don't, you're going to suffer those consequences of before and beyond. That's what I'm going to be able to offer you, Miles. And Miles is just like, hey, I'm the real one. And then he looks around and he sees the 7 other different duplicates. And it's just like, hey, do you really think that you're a real one? Is that really what you think? Because if you do think that you're the real one, then you can stop taking those pills and you don't have to worry about it. And with this kind of psychological trauma really inflicted on Miles Warren, who isn't really a strong person in general, he pops the pill and he kind of lives in his life of subservience. They claim the Jackal suit, and then they kind of pick up to where we're at in real time. And where we're at in real time is that Ben Reilly and Peter Parker, still dressed as Spider-Man, are going over this situation, and we find that Peter's will is kind of broken. He sees the error of his ways. He sees his original sin, his ultimate kind of loss of Uncle Ben, and he's looking to kind of make that situation right, which has me kind of at a loss. Because if we look at that becomes, Peter Parker is definitely driven by guilt. He is Not necessarily an altruistic individual. He's often portrayed as one because when we talk about the origin of Spider-Man, the reason that he became this kind of guilted hero is because he was out for himself. He was looking to make money. He was wrestling. He could have stopped a robber, and he didn't, and that caused the death of his Uncle Ben. So because he wasn't that person, he didn't have that sense of great responsibility that he does now, he lost the one person that was closest to him. Well, one of the people that was closest to him. And he's been trying to live that down ever since. And every loss just stacks on top of that guilt. And this is kind of Peter saying, maybe I can get rid of that. And that's the weakest part of Spider-Man. Like, that is legitimately the weakest part of Spider-Man. And Ben Reilly just goes in and just digs right into that nerve center of guilt. And it's just like, I can alleviate it, man. I can take it all away. I can take all the pain away. You can have Uncle Ben back. You can have everybody that you've ever lost back. You don't have to feel guilt anymore, Peter. You just don't. That's a real tough one. I'm struggling with that one on the inside because I like to think that over the years, Peter Parker and Spider-Man have become a much more, staunch supporter of justice, those kind of things. But you have seen the situations where he isn't. He's not necessarily that person driven by doing good for the sake of doing good. He's not necessarily out there in front of the public. He's not a face of doing good. He is a vigilante that hides in the shadows, works in secret, has a secret identity that he doesn't share with anybody but the most intimate members of his family. He is not somebody that's out there like Captain America or Iron Man or the Fantastic Four. He's not recognized as being a superhero. He doesn't invite that into his life. He does this out of guilt, or at least that's what this is basically saying, and that this is his opportunity. It's like his get out of jail card. And whew, man, that is some serious temptation. So I'm going to have to wrestle with how I feel about that, because it conflicts with how I feel about Peter Parker, but it doesn't. So I'm going to have to understand, I'm going to have to think about what Peter Parker as Spider-Man really means to me as a character and whether this really kind of aligns with my thoughts on him. But as far as the context of the story and what Peter has been written at since like the beginning of the Dan Slott run, I don't feel like it's too out of character. I feel like this is a decision that he might make in a moment of weakness. He's been faced with all these kind of things, these travesties, these affronts to his memory of these individuals, these people that kind of their loss shaped him as a character. People are back. They're alive. They can live their lives again. And Uncle Ben can do that too, which kind of kills him inside. It's like that's ultimately what he wants. I don't necessarily know if this is my version of Peter Parker or my version of Spider-Man, but as far as the context of the story, I find that Amazing Spider-Man number 22 becomes a quintessential must-read book for this entire series. It really kind of plays on how Ben Reilly got into his emotional state that he's currently in and how he's going about convincing Peter Parker to become a part of his team at New U. This is a game changer. So definitely you've got to go read it. Whether you're going to enjoy it or not, that's up to you, but it's definitely one you got to read. So that's my review of Amazing Spider-Man number 22, a part of the Clone Conspiracy, but I want to know what you guys think about this too. We can start a great discussion about Spider-Man and what Spider-Man means, so hit me up in the comments and we can start doing that. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe right there to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV.